Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later because we have an anniversary to celebrate. You see, in news that's every bit as legendary as it is horrifying, Transformers is now a very grand 40 years old, something which Hasbro seemed determined to remind us of with a logo designed to make our aging joints creak just at the sight of it. But if you sat there chuckling away at us older fans because today's toys originate from an era long before you were even born, have no fear, it'll happen to you. But yes, there are still those of us who remember the good old early days of specimens like G1, Soundwave and Blaster. Now back again for the latest round of reissues, despite both having been regular candidates for the treatment already over the years. Inevitably, someone will make mention of the seemingly recent Walmart reissues, for example, although as if further evidence of the savage passage of time were needed, I feel it's only right to point out they dropped half a decade ago. Maybe you weren't feeling old before, but I guarantee you are now, eh? Anyway, despite their prevalent previous use, the molds are here presented with a sparkling new retro-styled revision to bring these vintage designs closer to their classic screen counterparts than ever before, putting them in the highly illustrious company of this line's rather fabulous releases thus far, including a simply breathtaking makeover of what is objectively the best Transformers toy of all time. To be fair, I have quite the love for G1 Soundwave too, having first picked up a copy of the original release all the way back in the mid-90s on a memorable trip to Birmingham's NEC Toy Fair with my late uncle. This vintage example has been a treasured possession ever since, especially as I can still vividly recall the sheer awe of giving it a once-over for the first time. There's still a rather joyful sense of wonder I feel whenever I clap my eyes on the initial early 80s micro-change hand-me-down, and the updated retro overhaul has lost none of that inherent charm. It's been given quite the different look here though, with a cleaner, bolder style, all designed to bring the anime-accurate vibes this line of releases is now known for. For starters, the colours are noticeably more vivid and striking, with a highly saturated blue used for the main body and a brighter, warmer shade of grey present on the arms and legs. As expected based on previous retro reissues, the distinctive chrome highlights of the original release are now a thing of the past, here replaced with a more straightforward bare plastic finish on areas such as the tape deck buttons. Some collectors will no doubt continue to bemoan this choice, given the chrome's rather legendary status throughout the earliest years of Transformers toys. But I have to admit there's a definite appeal in this new approach too, and it certainly works in making this re-release feel unique in its way. The same is true with the classic version's use of decals, which were plentifully applied over much of the body and served to infuse it with a plethora of extra colour and additional detail. Whereas the new reissue opts for simple, unadorned surfaces, more akin to Soundwave's on-screen portrayal. However, there are some newly designed but still reminiscent tampos found on the knees, and the wrists here are sporting a rather attractive painted red stripe, instead of the typically perpetually peeling wraparound sticker. Likewise, where once there was a shiny chromed gold trim on the tape deck door, now we have a very bright and bold painted yellow finish, including some extra stripes to the side in a clever use of the existing moulding, as well as a subtle but effective light blue translucent plastic for the window section itself, all complemented by a significantly larger and more anime-style Decepticon insignia. The chest is arguably the most significant update of all. The opening window is an iconic signature of Soundwave, meaning such a drastic redesign cannot help but be immediately noticed. Fortunately, it looks fantastic, and no doubt breathes a bit of new life into this already well-familiar feature. Of course, the spring-loaded tape deck door still opens by pressing the iconic shoulder button, at which point you'll note the hinges connect at the sides of the panel underneath, precisely the same as you see on all re-releases of Soundwave going back to the 1980s, after Takara made a running change to the design, leaving only the earliest examples of the toy with no visible hinge and the more stylish solution of separate buttons recessed behind opaque plastic. Still, whilst the retro reissue maintains the updated singular protruding button block, it's now also sporting some very welcome blue paint applications to break up the buttons visually. It's a similar story on the head design, which here eschews the familiar yellow visor of the vintage release in favour of a screen-accurate red alternative, along with some additional paint for the middle of the face and sides of the helmet, capably recalling the animation despite this toy's moulded detail still being quite a different vibe overall. And finally, there's more red paint to be found on the accompanying weapons, with some added flourishes to the end of the shoulder cannon to pull out the pre-existing detail of the sculpt. Nice touch. The handheld blaster may lack the classic release's spring-loaded firing mechanism these days, but one thing that will never go out of style is how both weapons can be folded up and repurposed as a pair of batteries for the alternate tape deck form, neatly stowing away inside a hidden rear compartment in what remains one of the most elegantly effective toy features to this day. Add it all up and you get add an exceptionally distinct flavour for this latest release, making a thoroughly familiar design feel quite surprisingly new and a world away from either the original take or the 2019 Walmart version. If ever there was a question mark about why they opted to do yet another reissue, this comparison should put the query to bed, surely. Besides, with a toy design as undeniably timeless as this, why quibble when it's given another chance to shine? For my part, I'd be thrilled to see more recolours in the future to complement the amazing options we've already seen over the years. It also means that of every version of the toy that ever was, this is far and away the closest to the character's cartoon counterpart, and like previous retro releases, shows that although the aesthetic of the original toys always felt quite heavily revised in translation to the screen, a lick of paint is surprisingly effective at bridging the gap somehow. As you might expect, such a drastic do-over extends to Soundwave's cassettes, which here include both Ravage and Laserbeak, instead of the G1 figure's more traditional toy partner of Buzzsaw. This updated pair look a world away from their original release counterparts, as despite some superb presentation, you'll quickly notice how much of the classic tape-style detailing has been removed, making them appear almost weirdly plain by way of comparison. Still, the finish on offer is spectacular, and even though the lack of microcassette features is a bit of a trade-off in this mode, it's one that pays dividends for their robotic beast forms, as we'll soon see. In the meantime, there's positively tons of fun to be had by opening up Soundwave's cassette deck chest and popping his partners into their rightful place. Despite the feature already being hugely familiar both on this exact toy design and plenty of updated attempts since, it retains a massive wallop of fun factor, never failing to raise a wry smile despite the technology it represents being so admittedly outdated by modern standards. Dare I say, it's no doubt one of the coolest gimmicks on any Transformers toy ever, which perhaps explains why we're still trying to come up with a better, more future-proofed explanation for Soundwave keeping his minions in his chest to this day. The fun continues as you transform them both to their robot forms, in a process which remains remarkably straightforward. Naturally though, the classic parts forming element of these micro-change originals remains as present as ever, meaning this pair might register as real oddities in the eyes of some modern collectors. That said, I continue to find the resulting pair of animal partners nothing shy of absolutely charming, especially as it's in this guise where the pared back retro makeover has its real time to shine, presenting us with among the best looking outings for either of these molds in some time. I'm a huge fan of the way the designers have incorporated a small Decepticon insignia onto Ravage's front leg joint, in a manner which effectively recalls his more rounded cartoon model interpretation, and the lack of cassette detail here means that for once, he looks equally great no matter which side of the toy is facing you. Again, the chrome of the original is a thing of the past, but the brushed silver finish of the weapons here is no small consolation prize. It all means Retro Ravage is a highly welcome new addition to the ever-increasing leagues of repaints I own of this mold, in that it brings something decidedly new to the table, even after so many years. Laserbeak is similarly stunning, with that rich new red never failing to catch your attention, and the updated decals bringing a pleasingly unfussy sense of animation-accurate flavour, which again shows that these designs can still sing. As with Ravage, the rear-mounted accessories present beautifully, and even if this release is sporting the neutered nubs common of all modern reuses of the mold, it's an understandable compromise on what is otherwise an overall gorgeous specimen. One thing that is quite weird is the updated position of Laserbeak's painted eyes, which now sit further up atop what would typically be his bird brow, instead of using the toy's inherent moulded eye slit as a guide for placement. This is something which seems to change on every subsequent reissue, but no doubt the retro solution is the strangest by far. Still, this updated take is again hugely worthwhile, and like Ravage sits in prestigious place among the many varied and colourful uses of the toy design we've received over the years. It adds up to a strong showing for Soundwave and his minions. But if further proof were needed that there's life in the old dogs yet, then I'm happy to report the new makeover of 1985's Blaster is every bit as commendable. Like his audio-themed nemesis, this is a toy which has been reissued countless times over the decades, yet here feels entirely fresh thanks to some surprisingly subtle but astute tweaks to the existing formula. As before, the colour palette has been noticeably adjusted to better convey a sense of screen accuracy. However, some of it is not as overt on a cursory evaluation as with Soundwave, in that it's only by way of direct comparison these updates become all the more apparent, throwing the changes in hues into stark contrast. The obvious change that draws your eye is the cooler grey of the lower half, presenting as hugely distinct from the more traditional release and leaving that version looking almost bizarrely discoloured by juxtaposition. It gives the retro figure a sort of instantly appealing, cleaner vibe somehow. Equally, the overall appearance has been softened significantly by replacing the harsh black sections of the original with an altogether more toned down but hugely complementary dark grey, working its magic not just on the arms and rifle accessory, body, but also the moulded boombox speaker and handle elements in the legs. Likewise, where the toy once appeared to be sporting a pair of black school shoes, now his feet have been recolored to better match the rest of the lower limbs, exactly as found on the animation model. In similar fashion to Soundwave, you'll further note how many of the finer details and highlights have been updated from the vintage version of Blaster, all in a manner which may not be apparent on first glance, but proves remarkably effective in bringing the design ever closer to the cartoon once you add it all up. Sure, in some areas it's a straightforward removal of decals in favour of unencumbered plain surfaces, but many of the revisions run significantly deeper once you start paying more attention. Of particular note is the tuning dial to the left of the cassette door, now painted for the first time on any use of this mould, alongside the ultra-fine but effectual new detailing used to enhance the on-off button on the leg. Great stuff. The Autobot's face has been dramatically enhanced via a new coat of bright pearlescent silver paint, accentuated to great effect by an updated pair of popping baby blues, imbuing the figure with a sense of life and making it majorly stand out versus the original's more muted yellow peepers. Speaking of muffled colours, one thing I was surprised by is how the main body is a subtler shade of red than on the original. You'll no doubt need to assess them side by side to fully appreciate the distinction, but I did think there was a vague irony in how the updated toy actually tones down the saturation to better achieve such a bold cartoonish vibe. One thing that does make me chuckle is how, despite Blaster's already sizable stature, the promotional pics showed the retro figure with extended knees, in a manner that I have no doubt many assume was a classic stock photography mistransformation. However, by replicating this supposed error yourself and comparing it to the animation model, it quickly becomes clear such a configuration was very likely the basis for the cartoon's design, which is a super fun fact, even if I can't help but think it looks majorly goofy on the toy itself. Again though, it's the tape deck chest which is also worth a sizable slice of the scrutiny. In this case, there are some additional lines added to the translucent triangular window, as well as a block grey middle section with a central circular feature drawing your eye. Of course, this was added to make Retro Blaster a better approximation of the cartoon, although it's interesting to note the animation model features a solid lighter grey section here, instead of the traditional see-through finish of the toy. One assumes the designers wanted to maintain the ability to observe any microcassette minions inside the chest compartment, but still I might have been intrigued to see them go with a fully screen accurate take all the same. However, I also want to highlight where the inspiration for the circular design originated from, as it's such a weirdly specific inclusion not seen on the vintage Blaster figure that the cartoon was in turn intended to advertise. Believe it or not, we can trace this back to the pre-Transformers Microchange original, which, instead of transformable partners, featured a small AM radio accessory as the source of the figure's main play value. Once inserted in the chest, the realistic detailing on this component was prominently visible through the window, and no doubt served as the stimulus for what we saw on screen, despite no longer being part of the Blaster toy itself. It brings the design bizarrely full circle in a way, but whatever the case, it looks fabulous and makes for a show-stopping, updated outing of an already beloved classic mould, standing proudly next to some of its forebears along the way. Naturally, Blaster also retains his signature tape deck gimmick, here activated by a push of the eject button underneath. The other buttons will kind of deploy, but as the rest of the functionality from the Microchange design was stripped out for the 1985 Transformers release, so this reissue follows suit. Still, the remaining feature allows us to appreciate the included partner, that being lovable Lion Steeljaw. You'll immediately note how different the retro take is versus the 1986 style, though despite also lacking much of the classic detail, the new cartoon panel lines look equally good to my eye, and similar to Ravage mean this example is now more uniform on both sides. The transformation to Beast Mode remains as straightforward as ever, again unfolding in a fairly two-dimensional manner before employing the use of separate parts pegged onto the sides for the weapons. The result is a highly striking overhaul for Steeljaw's lion form, here presented with a more uniform burnt yellow than the brighter two-tone previous version, which, alongside the new tampode elements and a welcome splash of red for the Autobot logo, all looks fantastic. Again, some will be sad by the lack of chrome, although the brushed gold finish on the weapons is superb by my estimation, also bringing him much closer to the character's cartoon appearance as one might expect, and making him a highly welcome inclusion in this package, even if I can't help but wish he'd had another friend alongside him. Still, with the molds for Ramhorn, Rewind and Eject, not to mention many more Autobot and Decepticon cassette partners still waiting in the wings, one imagines it will only be a matter of time before we might see a retro-style box set of some sort, which would be great fun, even if it has the potential to open up old debates that are best left well alone. Overall though, this pair of toys remains as amazing as ever, having lost none of their appeal since their mid-1980s heyday, and now looking as fresh and fabulous as ever thanks to a round of retro makeovers. Sure, they may be largely non-articulated bricks by modern standards, but when they're rocking unparalleled levels of charm such as this, I for one can honestly say I'm not not missing the presence of an ab crunch. Anyway, there's more to say yet, as it's time to move on to their musical themed alternate modes. Transformation done, and it remains remarkable to me just how many of these early Transformers toy designs continue to pack a sizable punch in deploying the fun factor of the line's central gimmick. Though the design prowess has no doubt evolved leaps and bounds in the decades since, the original Soundwave and Blaster figures remain a real yardstick, showcasing exactly how to realise these characters in dual mode working form without any undue complication or added complexity. Yet, despite their mostly straightforward A to B approach, these two still encapsulate everything that makes such conversions so engaging, presenting a reasonable but repeatable level of challenge and dishing out a decent dose of satisfaction once you're all done. And whilst it's true they both follow a similar formula of head stowing away, arms tucking in and legs folding up, it's worth mentioning how distinct they feel from one another, never cribbing off their rival's design despite so many obvious opportunities to do so. Though they share similar origins and features, the two toys maintain their unique identity throughout, complementing each other as much as they stand on their own merit. Soundwave remains a concisely compact little model, every hint of the robot form neatly tidied away in a remarkably efficient yet effective manner. It makes this condensed tape deck mode the standard still to beat for modern revisions of the classic character archetype, as dare I say, I don't believe this 80s original has ever been definitively bettered despite some stiff competition along the way. True, the prominent action buttons remain purely for show, although the combo of the aforementioned spring-loaded window gimmick and the rear opening battery compartment brings all the tactile thrill you could wish for. And there's an array of little moving dials and sliders to give the illusion of further interactivity besides. Really, my only grumble is that the robot head on my copy refuses to sit completely flush, but otherwise it's a remarkably handsome specimen and showcases the very best of what classic-style Soundwave toys have to offer. It also sits as such a discernible complement to its vintage counterpart that even if you're already well versed in this mold's charms, I can't help but feel that there's still enjoyment left on the table here for you. Equal delights remain in store on Blaster, as again, it's honestly hard to conjure up examples of many modern attempts that achieve such an aesthetically pleasing result in so straightforward a manner. It all locks together solidly and looks remarkably cohesive from every conceivable angle, meaning that in terms of robots turning into rectangular boxes, this is about as good as it gets. Despite a faint whiff of robot head kibble, there's precious little to quibble on this mode, and the newly updated colour scheme shows it off at its very best. Again, it may lack the intricate functionality of the vintage microchange release, and without that toy's ingenious headphone solution, you're inevitably left with a superfluous rifle popped off to the side somewhere. But still, this is sterling stuff and a beautifully presented overhaul of a celebrated classic design. And as with robot mode, the new changes may not be instantly apparent, but once you sit it side by side with the original, I feel quite confident that even experienced fans will find something new to appreciate about it. All told, it means you can't really go wrong with either retro Soundwave or Blaster. I've seen varying levels of excitement for these releases even from die-hard G1 collectors, which I think says more about their prevalence on the previous reissue circuit than anything else. However, I'm equally thrilled to report that going once more and to the breach was undoubtedly worth it in this case. Largely because both the updates here feel so new, reinvigorating a pair of already timeless toys with fresh appeal and making this revisit to well-trodden territory an undiluted pleasure. It makes them yet another big win for the ongoing retro reissue line, as they ably take their place next to the burgeoning roster of magnificent overhauls thus far. Every subsequent release has been a revelation in its way, leaving me remarkably excited for where we might go next. It's sadly undeniable that we'll never see a full 1986 movie cast realised in this revised form, whether on account of the moulds not having survived the test of time, or just not being compatible with modern production. Yet, whilst it's a crying shame to consider some of the contenders likely off limits for the treatment, it's still a singular delight to receive such remarkable examples as these. Which is all to say that whether you're a long-term veteran G1 collector, or completely new to old old school vintage Transformers toys. There's plenty to appreciate about this acoustic style duo, making them a pair of pitch perfect toots. Now today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the description below where you can check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video please, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts on these toys. Do you like what you see, or not so sure? Otherwise that's it from me, so thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. TTFN.